Chris, founder of Umano. Today we're doing a quick introduction into DORA Metrics and looking beyond DORA Metrics to help understand how you can measure team productivity and experience to accelerate your ways of working. In this introductory session, we'll quickly run through the power of metrics as a recap. We'll talk through and introduce the specific DORA metrics and the benefits in terms of why they matter and the impact that they can have on your team. And then also start to introduce and widen your thinking to other metrics that can provide insights into the full value stream as your team works to create and ship value to your customers. So to kick off as a quick introduction, why do metrics matter? Ultimately, metrics are a signal into how your team practices to execute its work. In the context of setting goals, working together to build what you're building and ship that out into the hands of your customers, more often than not, you're really trying to get a gauge on your progress and ultimately look to reduce friction and optimize that workflow so that you can accelerate the way that you're delivering value to customers and have a whole lot of fun while you do it. They matter because by providing insights into your workflow, you can ultimately identify blockers and outliers a lot more quickly so that you can be making better decisions in a faster manner around how you can optimize and reduce the things that are getting in your way. And ultimately continuously improve in the context of Agile so that you can really elevate your game as you ship product to customers. There are, however, dangers in using metrics. And it goes without saying that unless there is a culture of clear intent and psychological safety, often metrics can be weaponized and tell the story that suits an individual most with respect to how they want to use metrics to create outcomes that are disadvantageous into your ways of working and ultimately can create misuse can create more harm and do more harm than good. And so the focus for today, as I've introduced already, is really to provide a summary of the DORA metrics as those industry standard bedrocks for how we measure team performance and accelerate ways of working, but also to help you guys start to think about a broader catalog of metrics that provide signals into how your team is practicing and where else you may be able to continuously improve. And so to recap on the importance of why it matters to embed metrics into your ways of working. The first is that it helps enable data-driven or data-inspired decision-making. Here we enable the team to not just present how they're feeling, but also the facts of what's actually going on. This way we can remove perception and bias and really get to the bottom of what may be holding you back, where the opportunities are to optimize, and how to align everybody around what needs to happen for focus. The second aspect of why it matters to embed metrics into your ways of working is to create alignment across multifunctional teams. Here, if we can get everybody on the same page around those facts and the data that presents those insights, we can align much more quickly on what needs to happen, who needs to do what, and how you can ultimately accelerate your pathway and progress toward your goal. The third aspect of why it's really important to embed metrics into your ways of working is to elevate the transparency and accountability across your organization. Clearly, in Agile ways of working, we're really trying to empower self-accountability at the team level. And so if we can equip teams with insights from metrics, teams are far more confident to be able to advocate on their own behalf of what they need and when they need it, and ultimately collaborate far more effectively to deliver those outcomes as they need. And finally, it goes without saying that if we can embed metrics into our ways of working, we can absolutely improve team morale when it's done in the context of having psychological psychologically safe environments, and clear intention as to why we're embedding metrics in the context of growth and continuous improvement for how we work. Another aspect of bringing metrics into ways of working in the context of team morale is that it creates a sense of being seen, where teams sometimes may feel hidden in the broader mechanisms of an organization. Metrics surface how you're working, not only for yourself so that you can optimize and improve, but also so that other teams can see how you're tracking and step in and support you when you may need that extra hand for support. On the flip side, there are very obvious challenges of working in an environment without the support of data-driven ways of working and metrics embedded into your workflow. The first aspect of having limited visibility really slows teams down through opaque working environments, unclear handover points, and workflow and performance generally becoming unclear. We miss opportunities of optimization because potential blockers may go unnoticed, and the opportunity to jump on things in a timely manner is clearly one of those missed opportunities. Thirdly, teams can experience bottleneck blindness, where inefficiencies and roadblocks can remain hidden and ultimately inhibit and perpetuate a cultural blocker, where ultimately all teams, not just yourself, will slow down because they're affecting the system and not just your own way of working. And finally, we talked about team morale and experience of joy. We know that productivity and motivation can definitely suffer when we're in an environment that's unclear, without accountability, clear handover points, and without that visibility into workflow and how you're moving and progressing towards your goals. And so, as we've painted the picture and context for working in a data-inspired environment where it's very clear that there's power and benefits in embedding metrics into your workflow, let's kick off with introducing DORA Metrics as industry standards into measuring and accelerating engineering team productivity and performance. DORA metrics were created by Google's DevOps and research assessment teams, where they set out to understand what were the inputs, or indeed how do we measure the real ingredients to high-performing teams. Across all of their engineering teams, they came up with the following 4 metrics as clear signals to identify what high performance looks like in product delivery and engineering DevOps teams. The first metric that they identified was deployment frequency, where deployment frequency is the average number of daily finished code deployments in any given environment. Ultimately, it's a measure of speed, efficiency, and automation with respect to how quickly deployments can be shipped into a production environment. It's trying to encourage teams to deliver small software deployments on a frequent basis to reduce the number of changes and risks in each cycle as they're introduced into an environment. And ultimately, the aim is that the more frequent deployments you make, the more you allow your teams to collect feedback sooner in that genuine agile way of working, which leads to faster iterations. As I've mentioned, it's an indicator of overall team efficiency and speed, and measures that speed of development team in their capabilities and the level of automation that exists in their workflow. The second of the metrics that the Google DORA team identified was lead time for changes. And again, this is a measure of speed for your team. It measures the average speed at which the DevOps team delivers code from commitment to deployment. It's an indicator of the team's capacity, the complexity of the code that they're deploying, and their overall ability to respond to changes in their environment. The metric will help your teams quantify code delivery speed and how quickly teams are shipping to a value to the customer. It reduces the amount of work in the deployment, improving code reviews, and ultimately can spot to where you can increase automation to reduce that lead time for change overall. The first two metrics matter, particularly in the context of when deployments are successful. The next two metrics that the DORA team identified were metrics that related to quality and particularly give insights into measuring the practices where those deployments are not successful. And so the first is change failure rate, which measures the percentage of deployments that cause a failure in an environment, in particular your production environment. Deployment frequency and lead time, as I've mentioned, all really focus on when those deployments are successful. But here, change failure rate is picking up as a countermeasure to speed what may be a critical response that's required, where bugs in production and the severity of and frequency of those issues being raised can be addressed and ultimately restored back to a stable environment. It's really here to drive and focus on reducing the amount of work in progress in the deployment, as well as identifying opportunities to increase that automation. The fourth and final measure that the Google DORA metrics identify is a mean time to repair. And here we're talking about the time to restore a service or the mean time to recover a service, but when it fails. And it's the average time between encountering the issue and resolving the issue in the production environment. We know that response times are critical when something goes wrong because we want a seamless customer experience. And whether it's an external security threat or a bug that's brought about a standstill to your environment, the DevOps teams must be able to respond rapidly with bug fixes, new code releases, and updates. There's a huge impact for those teams that are embedding DORA metrics into their workflow. The first is the direct link not only into the health of teams, but into the health of companies. Google have identified and measured and quantified a direct correlation between those teams that are working with DORA metrics to improve performance in real time to the overall organizational performance, where on average, companies that have teams operating with DORA metrics can improve their operational efficiencies and organizational performance, including profitability, by as much as 30%. The second impact of teams embedding DORA metrics into their ways of working is clearly optimizing their way of tracking progress to plan, where not only do teams get a baseline to measure their growth, but they then can take action to identify those opportunities and ultimately improve and remove blockers, remove friction, and optimize where needs be. The fourth aspect of why DORA metrics matter is really about enhancing team alignment. We know that teams that work in multidisciplinary and cross-functional environments are far more effective in collaborating, building trustful ways of working, and are successful, empowered by the insights that these DORA metrics can provide in ways of working, and really create far more confident, robust conversations that deepen collaboration and trust and help teams to accelerate how they ship product into market. And so DORA metrics provide very clearly huge benefits to DevOps teams in the way that they work. What I wanted to do, though, was to really expand your thinking and not just equip your teams with the power of embedding DORA metrics into your ways of working, but also to think beyond and expand how you are thinking about visualizing your entire workflow so that you can optimize at any stage and really create the benefits of alignment and focus to reduce friction and accelerate product delivery into market. Let me be clear in unpacking that a little bit more. If you take the entire workflow for a product delivery or DevOps and working in an agile or DevOps method, they will receive a set of requirements and be involved in the definition of those requirements. They'll then go to create and build that code. There's a whole review practice that goes on in terms of peer review or code review, that then gets into being committed and then deployed in the pipeline before it gets into a customer's hands in a production environment. So DORA metrics provide that visibility into the code commitment and deployment aspect of the workflow, but there's this whole upstream input aspect of your delivery, of your value stream and of the way that you're delivering code that you can also get visibility into with a much more broad catalog of metrics. As an example, and here I'm just going to quickly jump into Umano's sprint summary report, which provides an illustrative example of the other types of metrics that you can identify to visualize how your team is practicing and spot in the same way blockers or opportunities to improve in the way that you design, build, review before you then commit and deploy your code. And so here in Umano's sprint report for a particular team, for a particular sprint, we're visualizing a team's way of working across their design and build practices, their review practices, and their overall engagement practices. And as you can see, we really encourage teams to think about the agility outcome that they're trying to achieve, i.e. the overall focus of what aspect of their practice or way of working that they're trying to improve. And then once they're clear on that outcome, they can start to define the metrics that support, that first of all visualize and then support them in an understanding where they can optimize that particular practice as a lever to improve and achieve that outcome in greater and more rapid success. So in this case, for example, if your team's focus is on improving speed, you have then a set of metrics such as lead time, cycle time, time and status, and efficiency rate to help accelerate the way that your team works together to deliver code prior to commitment. If your focus, as an example, is on building more stable practices and greater predictability to the way that you're shipping product to market, you could then look at sprint stability or, for example, the number of changes that are occurring in your workflow mid-iteration. You could look at estimate accuracy and how consistent or predictable you are in the way you estimate if you're using that as part of your practice. And similarly, capacity, insights into how much the capacity changes of teams or the assignment of work across teams changes as another indicator for building greater predictability into your workflow. And so, as I've mentioned, this is just a very quick example of a broader catalog of metrics beyond just DORA that's providing insight into the code commit and deploy aspects of your way of working, but really looking at those inputs. And so when you start to think about data-inspired ways of working, we really encourage you not just to think about the outputs that DORA metrics are providing visibility into, but also inputs. So all of the pre-work that's required in terms of the requirements, the workflow to get the code ready for being committed and then deployed. The other aspect of thinking about more broadly is not just the inputs and the outputs, but also the outcomes. And so in the classic agile way of working, we're really encouraging teams to think about their customer and obviously the value that they're shipping. And so the delight of the customer and being able to understand the impact that you're having on the delight of the customer is critical. We know there's a number of different ways to measure that. Simple way could be looking at customer reported defects. Another metric could be looking at the net promoter score. Another way of understanding customer impact could be simply the revenue related data or the usage related data for the product or the feature that you've shipped to market. So again, just to reiterate, when you're employing or are rolling out a data-driven way of working, absolutely think about DORA as the bedrock for understanding how you can accelerate performance and accelerate delivering value to customers. But we also ask you to think and encourage you to think more broadly in terms of inputs and outcomes. The second aspect of thinking about how you can embed a data-inspired way of working much more broadly than DORA is to move beyond metrics that provide facts or quantitative insights into your workflow and your practices and capture context. It's critical as we shift from purely thinking about performance as productivity to think about the experience, the enjoyment, and the engagement of the team members. It's all well and good to have a highly productive team, but teams can be held back, and ultimately levels of productivity can be entirely unsustainable. And so we want sustainable, productive teams that are highly engaged, enjoying their experience of doing what they're doing, because we know that ultimately creates an environment for teams to deliver their best work, and their best work gets straight into the hands of delighting customers. Finally, when we think more broadly beyond just DORA metrics speak very specifically to the engineering function in a cross-functional team. And so in a modern way of working, we know product delivery and shipping value to customers doesn't just rely on the engineering team. If you take in an agile context, the additional roles of product managers and scrum masters or agile coaches, or in a broader environment, we've also got growth marketers. We've got potentially data scientists. We've also got potentially people from finance involved in the way that product is designed, created, and shipped. And so we need a common language in our metrics to unite teams to create very clear meaning and accelerate through shared language, common meaning and understanding, so that, again, that process of alignment means we can make decisions faster to optimize and reduce friction. The benefits of data-inspired ways of working by embedding DORA and other metrics as well as qualitative feedback loops into your ways of working go without saying. But to reiterate for you, we definitely see more balanced, confident team discussions. Remember, metrics and context captured through surveys or whatever aspects of your feedback loops present qualitative data are really just means to the outcome, means to the end. What's the outcome? It's more confident, data-driven conversations to get to where you need to get to quicker. It's accelerating performance and helping teams to really upgrade ways of working and get into that next level of performance that really sees teams in flow. Data-inspired ways of working absolutely gets you to identify blockers more quickly and focus on targeted measures or experiments to improve. And again, that focus accelerates your ways of working. Data-inspired ways of working also helps teams reduce stress. Because of that accountability and transparency, everyone gets on the same page a whole lot quicker, and we've got no one hiding in the shadows of fear or what if, and everything is out on the open in the context of a safe environment and in the context of clear intention of growth mindset. We can really elevate morale and productivity. And finally, that benefit of self-accountability as a team by equipping teams with data, both facts and feelings, they then are equipped to self-advocate. They can take decisions so much quicker. They can align stakeholders so much more confidently by being able to point out the data that sets them up for success in getting everyone on the same page to ship according to plan or to course correct where that needs to take place. Well, what we've just talked about really is and can sometimes be perceived as utopia. We all know, however, that there are anti-patterns that can undermine teams in the way that they employ and adopt metrics into your ways of working, and ultimately go against creating a safe environment where you're setting your teams up for success. And these anti-patterns can be quite unassuming and quite hidden in the cultural behaviors and language used across teams. And so to introduce some of these anti-patterns for you, noting that there's another video that does a deep dive for you more broadly on the anti-patterns that can hold your team and your organization back. As an introduction to those anti-patterns, vanity metrics are definitely to be avoided. These are the things that, like a lipstick on a pig, that make you look good to tell a particular narrative that you want, but fundamentally hide the truth and credit an actual story of what's going on. Classic vanity metric, lines of code as a signal of productivity, is just, I think, recognized and adopted industry-wide as being a vanity metric. The second anti-pattern that can occur and slip into language and culture is the shift from accountability into blaming. We really want to avoid blaming language and blaming culture. We don't want to highlight where or hold people to account when we're blaming an individual. It's totally counterproductive, or indeed, I should say, blaming a team. It's entirely counterproductive and undermines a really healthy, safe environment for teams to not fear failure, for teams to not fear making mistakes, but ultimately to help teams set them up for success. Of course, in the context of growth mindset, there can be really healthy conversations which do hold teams accountable, and teams hold themselves accountable in what went wrong, what the learning is, and what they can do differently. But we absolutely want to avoid blame, language, and culture, which metrics can do so easily when they're weaponized and being misused. A third anti-pattern, just to touch on here, is comparing teams. A quick side note here, DORA enables team comparison by benchmarking teams through those DORA metrics of measuring and baselining where they're at to industry standards. So Google, through the DORA DevOps research and assessment team, create a publicly available annual study where all teams self-report on their metric, DORA metrics, and therefore can aggregate all of that data into an industry-wide benchmark and then have teams compare themselves to that industry benchmark. In the context of looking, though, at other metrics purely within an organizational construct, an anti-pattern is to compare teams, where it just goes without saying, this is a very difficult construct. It's something that I know leadership always wants to do and is tempted to engage and cross-reference particular scores of metrics on different teams. The challenge, obviously, is that we're comparing apples with oranges. As much as we like to think teams are the same, they have different composition with different skills, working on different aspects. And so all of those unique variables for team dynamics make it really counterproductive to compare teams in building consistent, language across an organization in how teams are performing. And ultimately, you start to get stack ranking going on. Teams, again, start to fear what that may do with their own environment, whether they get strategic work or not. All of the counterproductive things that can come through and unsaid things that can come through comparing teams. So they're just three quick introductory anti-patterns. Like I said, there's another video that you can dive into for a much broader discussion and introduction into anti-patterns that can hold your team back and hold your data-inspired way of working back from truly elevating team performance and team success. When you start to think about embedding and employing data-inspired ways of working and either rolling out metrics or leveling up how metrics are used in your organization, we always work with our partners to think about defining and articulating and communicating a set of guiding principles that set your data-inspired performance culture up for success from the beginning. By being really clear in why you want to use metrics, you onboard and enroll teams and individuals into your broader objective for growth, for improvement, and for accelerating performance through the context of accelerating learning so that teams can grow faster and go faster and ship product, high quality product, into the hands of customers so that they can enjoy the value that you're creating. Again, there's a separate video on guiding principles in the Umano library that helps you to think more broadly across a range of guiding principles when you define what they could be. But here's just a quick introduction to get you thinking about what they could be for your own organization. The first is to articulate a principle about how metrics align and set up and reinforce the living values in your company. So how do metrics correlate to set your values up for success and really become a symbiotic part of building the right behaviors and language within your organizational context? Another guiding principle is to define who are the champions for metrics. And so this really is not so much about creating accountability with just one group or individual, but it's ensuring that a node of influence can really build literacy, as well as a level of comfort and cultural comfort in and around what metrics matter, what they are, which ones to use at which point in time, and really to build that program up for success so that it's embedded and interwoven into your ways of working. The third aspect of a guiding principle that you should definitely consider relates to transparency and psychological safety. And so in this, you're defining a principle with respect to transparency as to who gets to see what metrics. In other words, is it just leadership, or is it leadership and the teams? Or do all teams get to see all other teams and the metrics and the performance of all teams? So that's one principle that really needs to be articulated in terms of transparency. And that goes hand in glove with building a culture of psychological safety. So here a principle around how metrics will or will not be used so that teams and individuals are really clear on what the intention is. Again, for example, metrics will not be used for individual performance reviews and only be used for team self-improvement, as an example of a guiding principle in this area. So again, I encourage you to dive into the video that Umano has in and around a much broader set of guiding principles that you can think about. But absolutely, this is a critical path to success in ensuring you get traction with introducing metrics by clearly articulating your intention and enrolling and onboarding everybody into that way of working. And so to wrap up this introduction to data-inspired ways of working through the lens of DORA metrics and more, we really encourage you here from Umano to think about data-inspired change. That is, metrics are not just numbers. Metrics are absolutely about enabling change. Don't be afraid of a number. You get to assign the meaning. You get to assign the context. And by that, I'm really saying you define whether it's good or bad, helpful or hindrance in the way that you work. The context of being data-inspired is not also to look at just numbers, but really to encourage you to think also about context. Don't take just facts. Get feelings as well. Get context, get narrative in the feedback loops that you have in your ways of working. The second aspect of building a data-inspired way of working is to take action. Again, I talked earlier about metrics being a means to an end. Ultimately, the end is empowered, confident teams, comfortable and really equipped to take the action that they need to accelerate the way of working and to build an experience in their team and in their culture, in their organization, that they just love to engage with and super excited about coming to work, coming to be part of the team and deliver according to the goals that they have and the broader goals of the company. Again, we're encouraging you to think much more broadly and holistically in the way that you build out insights to improve ways of working. And so here, think not just about outputs that the DORA metrics so critically provide insight to, but think about inputs in terms of your ways of working. Get a broader catalog and really start to think about how you visualize your workflow, your value stream end to end, so that you can identify where the aspects of that workflow may be holding you back and what you can do about it. And then finally, that introduces and reinforces the aspect of continuous improvement. We don't want to stay static. We don't want to stand still as a team. We definitely get inspired and fired up by working in teams that are growing, that are improving, that are confident in robust conversations. And so this aspect of being equipped and informed through the insights that come from these levers, if you like, these signals that run along your way of working, that visualize your practices as to how you work, are critical inputs so that you can learn faster, grow faster, and go faster to shipping value to your team. And so to shipping value to your customers. And so that wraps up this short introduction into building your own data-inspired performance culture through the lens of DORA metrics and more, and how you can get traction and set your metrics program up for success to really elevate and set your teams up for high performance.